shadow. It is the antithesis of light, though it is not its rival, but its complement. Without light, the shadow cannot exist. That may seem elementary, but it is an important observation nonetheless. Associations with shadows can hold negative connotations due to their dark nature, but pure darkness is by no means the same. Like the twilight that ushers in the night, shadows do not erase the light, but relieve it. Link's quest of awakening the sages was more than halfway complete. With 4 of the 7 sages successfully awakened, his journey would next bring him to the House of Dead, according to the list Sheikah provided. A House of Dead, also known as a mausoleum, could in fact be found in the shadow of Death Mountain, just outside the familiar Kakariko village. According to Navi, this place was where all the dead of Hyrule went to be laid to rest. Following the 3 dedications of the temples prior, Link speculated that this place lay alms to the afterlife. The indigo sky of dusk was starting to settle in when Link was on his way up the Death Mountain Pass, nearing the end of it for the 3rd time. At that point, from the back of his trusty steed, he saw an orange glow emanating from beyond the hillside. "Link!" Navi screeched, as something was clearly wrong. Link squeezed his boots together so Epona would giddy up. Coming around to the entry gateway, Link began to choke on walls of gray smoke as they blew into his face. Not liking it either, Epona whinnied and twirled around. Link dismounted, leaving her at the village entrance, and he ran in with Navi to investigate. Crowds of people gathered around a tree near the entrance, as they looked on with concern at the source of the orange glow and smoke. The hilltop estate overlooking the village was ablaze with massive flames. The raging inferno threatened to spread, its tongues already engulfing the large manor below. Link ran over to the well, forgetting it had dried up long ago. It wasn't that which stopped him, though. It was a masked figure dressed in blue. Link stepped forward, but the figure put up an arm to halt him. "Get back, Link," Sheikah shouted. Link barely had time to react before the timber frame that held the rope pulley was ripped from its supports, disintegrating into wood splinters as it smashed into the ground behind them. As Link was focused on that, Sheikah shrieked behind him. Link twirled around to find him being dangled in the air by some invisible force. His body was violently shaken as he spun swiftly above the well, about 10 feet off the ground. Finally, he was flung through the air and landed amongst the shattered pieces of wood in the same place. Link ran over to his crumpled body. Their previous exchanges were far from his mind right then. Link propped him up, seeing the red of his irises peek through his dazed eyelids. But it was then when something chilling happened. A shadow, black as night, emerged from the well, creeping along the ground like a living blob of darkness. It climbed up the wall of the inn and over its gabled roof like it were a stepping stone. It slithered up the hillside behind the rest of the houses before it circled back around to the village entrance. It charged towards them, but Link stepped between it and Sheikah, pulling the Master Sword. He swung at it, but the shadow could not be effective, as it plowed full speed into them. In a bout of pain, a blackness came over Link. "Looks like you're coming around." It seemed like just seconds had passed when he heard Sheikah's voice, but it had apparently been several whole minutes he was out, for the sky above him was dark. Link sat up, Sheikah kneeling over him. A rain was falling now, and since there was no more orange glow, that meant the fire was at least under control now. The crowd of people had shifted their attention to him. The last thing Link could remember was a spine-tingling feeling brought on by the unnatural shadow that came from the well. Apparently, he had been flung about, just like Sheikah was. "Link," he began, "a terrible thing has happened." Sheikah turned around and dismissed the crowd, asking them to go back to their homes for their own safety. "Link, I need to tell you something." Link remembered there was some information he wanted from Sheikah, but he still hadn't come around enough to remember what it was. "Impa, she's not dead," Sheikah stated, appearing to fight back any emotion. Link heard it, but it took him a second to comprehend. "Wait, your mother? What happened then?" "The day we fled here," Sheikah's sanguine eyes seemed to glaze over with the memories of that day. "She was captured." Link remembered the information he so desperately wanted to hear, that Zelda was somehow still alive too, but he realized he wasn't going to hear it. Link, that thing you witnessed, you need to know what that was. The thought of it still sent shivers down Link's back. He propped his leg and clutched his knee in preparative fear of what that thing was. The townsfolk here celebrate Impa for giving Sheikah land to them, opening it up to the Hylians. The innkeeper told me that, Link remarked. Yes, well, what the story doesn't tell is the string of events that led to that. This caught Link's attention. He listened intently. Back in the day, before you and I were born, all Hylians lived in and around Hyrule Castle Town. And that was their territory, for as long as anybody could remember. But in those days, the king and queen of Hyrule decided they needed to form alliances to unify the neighboring territories under one banner. One tribe in particular resented that, and resisted. They were led by a young king of thieves from the west. Link imagined Ganondorf as a young conniving ruler. What you might not have guessed is that he had help from an alliance of his own, with a small group of the Sheikah clan, who also resented the unification. At the head of this faction of insurrectionists was a Sheikah leader, whose house once stood on that very spot. Sheik pointed to the well. The other faction, loyal to the royal family, was led by a brave young woman. These Sheikah fought the insurrectionists and helped lead the crown and all their allies to a final victory, all while keeping the fighting out of Caprica. That would explain why the innkeeper's story mentioned nothing about war. It was never here, said Link, thinking out loud. At the end of the war, she continued, she exiled the surrendered Gerudo who were hiding out here. With the very unfortunate decrease of the Sheikah's numbers due to the war abroad, there was now room for Hylians to move in, forming a village called Caprica Village. That woman was Impa, wasn't she? Link concluded. Sheik turned his head, putting his chin down to his shoulder and his hand to his chest. Not too long after, Impa was called upon to be the royal handmaid to the newborn princess. Zelda, Link finished. Sheik stared right at Link with his piercing crimson eyes. The Gerudo must have wanted revenge when they captured Impa 7 years ago, Link postulated as he attempted to connect the backstory. But she's still alive? It wasn't the Gerudo who captured her, she corrected. Link's train of thought was stopped dead. He had assumed this was the case. She was captured by that shadow, Link. Link raised his eyebrows in shock. Neither he nor Sheik were fully captured by it, thankfully. But what did it do with Impa? Sheik continued, providing an answer to his question. It burst from the well, just like it did earlier tonight. It grabbed a hold of her with its invisible grasp, like it did you and me, except it dragged her off, taking her away from us. Link imagined a young Sheik standing beside a young Zelda, and what they must have felt watching Impa being dragged away like that. We followed it, but it was so fast. We were at least able to track down where it went. Sheik faced away from Link, sustaining another long pause. And where was that? Link asked, breaking the silence. The Shadow Temple, Sheik responded as his crimson eyes once again met Link's. Temple, something clicked in Link's mind. If the sages before were Hylian, Kokiri, Goron, and Zora, logic would predict that the next sage would be Sheikah. But just as quickly as it went in there, Sheik resumed, it came back out, with no sign of Impa, and it returned to its resting place in the well. Link was a bit perplexed as to why the monster would do that. Did it simply place Impa down in the temple somewhere? Sheik's throat quivered as he swallowed. The insurrectionist leader, his house was burned to the ground, and the man was executed for treason by none other than Impa herself. Don't you see, Link? That shadow is the spirit of the insurrectionist leader. Clarity started to hit Link, making it all come full circle. It was the one who wanted revenge on her, he said. So it imprisoned her in the Shadow Temple for 7 years? During the war, Impa captured the insurrectionist leader on the Death Mountain Pass. Sheik began, prompting Link to recall his journeys up the pass he was referring to. And she held him deep in the Shadow Temple, for his Sheikah powers were great. He was imprisoned there for 7 years. It was almost poetic what Link was hearing, even though he felt devastated for Impa. The spirit wanted her to suffer that same sentence. And she's been in there this whole time? Link asked. There was no way of rescuing her? Sheik melancholily shook his head. And she survived that whole time? Sheik looked on at Link and nodded. Her Sheikah powers were great as well. I think she held on all those years because she knew he would be back. So you think the shadow went back? To the Shadow Temple? Sheik asked, finishing Link's question. There is no doubt in my mind that it is headed there. Link thought back to the evils plaguing the other temples he cleared, and thought of what evil could be brewing in this temple. Sheik was right. The shadow had to be the root of it. A sage must first hear the call to their respective temple before they can be awoken. Impa is answering that call now. Link, too, suspected Impa was the next sage. It had to be her. He pictured Impa trying to defend the temple against the shadow. Sheik, I will give every ounce of my energy to finding Impa, and I'll help her rid this evil from the temple, he promised. But if Impa really is the Sage of Shadow, that means... I know, Sheik interrupted as he turned away to hide a tear. Link felt sorrow, but it was commonplace to him at this point. Sheik turned back to Link, almost with a renewed vigor. The Shadow Temple is located to the east of the village, at the back of the graveyard. It has stood as Hyrule's necropolis for generations. A house of dead, Link repeated. Precisely. It is a catacomb built by the Sheikah, to house the dead and honor them. But the Sheikah have secured the place, making it impossible to even enter without a trained eye. That is why no one could get to Impa for all those years. A trained eye? The Sheikah were masters of illusion, and to see past their illusions, one must see the truth. But even these illusions most Sheikah could not see past. Sheik turned away again, and there was another pause. The only thing I can do for you is leave you with this. The man who lived where the well is now, they said he possessed an eye that could see the truth. With that, Sheik vanished in his signature flashbang.